Welcome to our channel, Crime Loom, the place where true crime stories come alive. There was a man known as the Professor. He fought with ideas, not with guns. For years, he studied the system and made a plan the world had never seen. He chose 8 people, each with their own past and their own skills. Their target was the Royal Mint of Spain. They were not going to steal money, but to create new money. Wearing red jumpsuits and masks, they showed the world that this was not just a robbery, but a rebellion. A man sat alone in a quiet room. His face was calm, but his mind was full of plans. He was called the Professor. He was not a man of guns or fists. He was a man of ideas. For many years, he had studied banks, money, and the mistakes of governments. He wanted to do something that nobody had ever done before. He wanted to carry out the perfect heist. The Professor was not greedy for money. For him, the heist was more than stealing. It was about showing the world something bigger. He wanted to prove that brains could beat power. He wanted to strike at the system without killing anyone. For this, he needed a team. He traveled in secret and looked for people who had nothing to lose. He searched for those who were smart, brave, or desperate. One by one, he found them. There were 8 people in total. Each of them had a special skill. Each of them was ready to risk everything. To keep their real names hidden, the Professor gave them city names. There was Tokyo, a young woman who was reckless but clever. She had been on the run for years, and she had a fire inside her. There was Berlin, calm and cold, who loved control and order. There was Rio, a hacker, young and full of energy, who was also in love with Tokyo. There was Nairobi, a woman with a bright smile and a sharp mind, who could manage money and people. There was Moscow, an older man with a kind heart who had once been a miner. His son Denver was also part of the team, with a strange laugh and a soft heart hidden behind a tough face. Finally, there were Helsinki and Oslo, 2 cousins, strong and quiet, who would guard the team. The Professor explained his plan to them. It was not a normal robbery. They would not steal money that already existed. Instead, they would break into the Royal Mint of Spain, the place where money was made. They would lock themselves inside with hostages and print billions of euros. By doing this, they would not be stealing from people's pockets. They would be creating new money. It would take time, but if they followed the plan, they could leave as the richest people alive. The plan was risky. They would stay inside the mint for days, maybe weeks. They would have to deal with the police, the hostages, and their own fears. The Professor warned them, no blood should be spilled. The world should see them not as killers, but as a symbol. The team agreed. They trained for 5 months. They practiced every detail, every step, every answer they might need. They studied the mint, the guards, and the police. They learned how to act when things went wrong. The Professor was like a teacher, patient but strict. He made them live together and follow rules. No one was allowed to share personal details. No one was allowed to fall in love. Feelings were dangerous. Only the plan mattered. Finally, the day came. The team wore red jumpsuits and Salvador Dali masks. These would hide their faces and become their symbol. They drove to the mint in a stolen truck. Tokyo's heart was beating fast. She had lived through many robberies before, but this one was different. This one was bigger. This one was history. They stormed into the Royal Mint, firing shots into the air but not hitting anyone. The workers and visitors inside screamed and fell to the ground. In moments, the place was under their control. The robbers locked the doors, cut off the outside, and took dozens of hostages. Among the hostages were important people. One of them was the daughter of a powerful man. Another was the director of the mint. This made the situation even more serious. The police gathered outside quickly, surrounding the building. They had snipers, cars, and negotiators. But the robbers were ready. The Professor was not inside the mint. He stayed outside, in a secret hideout. From there, he watched everything through cameras and radios. He called the police and acted as the voice of the gang. His calm tone confused them. He was always one step ahead. Inside, Berlin was the leader. He kept the team disciplined. Some of the hostages tried to escape, but they failed. Some of the robbers grew nervous, but Berlin kept them in line. Tokyo, however, was restless. She did not like being under orders. Her love for Rio also made her emotional. Nairobi tried to keep everyone's spirits high, joking and smiling even in the dark hours. As hours turned into days, the robbers made the hostages work. They forced them to operate the printing machines. The sound of money being made filled the air. Billions of euros were slowly coming to life, sheet after sheet. Outside, the police brought in a negotiator named Raquel Murillo. She was clever and strong, but her life was not easy. She was dealing with problems at home, but now she had to face the professor. She spoke to him every day, trying to break him. But the professor was careful. He studied her, learned her weaknesses, and even began to charm her. The world outside was watching too. News cameras showed the red suits and masks. People on the streets began to cheer for the robbers. They saw them not only as criminals, but as rebels against a broken system. The professor had expected this. The heist was becoming more than a robbery. It was becoming a revolution. Still, danger was everywhere. Some hostages looked for ways to fight back. Some police officers tried secret moves. And inside, the robbers were not always united. Tempers rose, arguments began, and trust was tested. The professor's perfect plan was being tested every second. But he had told his team one thing: patience is power. As long as they stayed calm and followed the plan, they had a chance. Tokyo looked around at the red walls of the mint, the scared faces of the hostages, and the piles of money growing higher and higher. She felt fear, but she also felt alive. She thought about what the professor had promised. When it was over, they would not just be rich. They would be remembered. And so the first days of the heist passed like a storm, with fear, hope, and fire in every corner. The game had begun, and there was no turning back. The air inside the Royal Mint grew heavy as the days passed. The sound of printing machines never stopped. Sheets of euros came out slowly, forming stacks of money that grew higher and higher. For the robbers, it was the sound of victory. For the hostages, it was the sound of fear. Berlin walked through the halls like a king. His face was calm, but his eyes were sharp. He reminded everyone of the rules. The hostages must stay quiet and do as they were told. The robbers must stay strong and united. But deep inside, Berlin was hiding a secret. His health was weak, and he knew his time was short. Yet he carried himself with pride, pretending he had control over everything. Tokyo moved like a restless flame. She was brave and strong, but her heart often led her into danger. She loved Rio, and that love made her reckless. Rio, young and hopeful, followed her with his eyes. He wanted to believe in the future, a life after the heist where they could be free together. Nairobi tried to keep the mood light. She encouraged the hostages, clapped her hands, and shouted at the machines to run faster. "Let's print history." She laughed, even when her heart was heavy. She had dreams, too. She wanted to leave her past behind and live a life with her child, far away from pain. Denver often stayed close to his father, Moscow. Moscow worried about his son, but he also felt proud. They were together in this madness, side by side. Denver's strange laugh sometimes echoed in the halls, making the others smile even in the darkest moments. Helsinki and Oslo stood like silent guards. Their strong bodies frightened the hostages, but behind their masks, they were gentle. They did not enjoy fear. They only wanted to protect the team. Outside, the police camp grew bigger each day. Cars, vans, and officers filled the streets around the mint. The negotiator, Raquel Murillo, sat at her desk with tired eyes. She spoke to the professor over the phone, trying to break his wall. But the professor always answered with calm words, never showing weakness. His voice was soft, almost kind, and sometimes it confused her. He seemed to know her better than anyone else. What Raquel did not know was that the professor was watching her closely. From his secret hideout, he followed her moves, her gestures, even her private struggles. He studied her not only as a negotiator, but as a person. Slowly, without meaning to, she began to trust him. The world outside the mint was changing too. People saw the robbers on television, dressed in red jumpsuits and wearing the strange daily masks. At first, they were called criminals. But soon, crowds began to sing for them, protest for them, and wave their masks in the air. To the people, they were becoming heroes who dared to fight against a broken system. But inside, the heist was not as perfect as the professor had planned. Some hostages were clever. One of them, a young woman named Monica, was scared but brave. She had caught Denver's eye. Denver was supposed to watch her closely, But instead, he felt something growing in his heart. He began to care for her more than he should. It was dangerous, and he knew it. Berlin noticed everything. He warned Denver to stay focused, but Denver could not stop his feelings. For the first time in his life, he saw someone who believed in him, not as a criminal, but as a man. Monica, too, began to feel something. Even though he was one of the robbers, she saw kindness in his eyes. The police tried different tricks to break the robbers. They sent spies, they tried to sneak in messages, they even prepared attacks. But every time, the professor was ready. He had planned for almost everything. Still, the risk was growing. One mistake could bring the whole plan crashing down. One night, Tokyo argued with Berlin. She hated his cold rules and his strict voice. She wanted more freedom, more control. Berlin, with his calm smile, reminded her that he was in charge. Their words turned into shouts, and the others watched in silence. The team was strong, but cracks were starting to appear. The professor listened to their fights from his hideout. His mind was like a storm, always thinking of solutions, always fixing problems before they grew. But he was also hiding his own fear. He knew that if the police discovered who he was, everything would end. Raquel, on the other hand, was starting to see the professor in a strange light. His words touched her, and his mind impressed her. She did not know his face, but she felt something pulling her toward him. At the same time, she was under pressure from her bosses who demanded results. They wanted the robbers crushed, no matter the cost. As the days went on, the hostages grew restless. Some of them whispered plans to escape. Others prayed for safety. A few even began to admire the robbers, seeing them as something more than enemies. Fear mixed with respect, and the line between right and wrong grew blurry. The robbers kept printing, hour after hour, day after day. The stacks of money were now mountains. Billions of euros filled the rooms, and the smell of ink filled the air. For some, it was the smell of hope. For others, it was the smell of doom. Then one mistake changed everything. Rio, the young hacker, broke one of the professor's rules. He used a phone in the wrong way, and the police traced the signal. For the first time, the professor's secret hideout was in danger. The police did not know it was him, not yet. But they were close, closer than ever before. The professor had to move quickly. He cleaned his tracks, hid his face, and used every trick he had learned over years of study. Still, his heart raced. He had promised his team the plan was perfect. Now, for the first time, it was cracking. Inside the mint, Berlin kept control with an iron hand. But Tokyo's anger, Denver's love, and Rio's mistake were shaking the balance. The dream of a perfect heist was slowly turning into a storm. And as the days stretched on, one truth became clear to everyone inside and outside the mint. This was not just about money anymore. It was about power, love, freedom, and survival. The professor's plan was still alive, but the road ahead was darker than he had imagined. The days inside the Royal Mint felt longer than normal days. For the robbers, time moved slowly, like heavy steps through thick mud. For the hostages, every second felt like a knife. The sound of printing machines never stopped. The red jumpsuits moved through the halls, and the masks hid every expression. But behind the masks, fear and doubt grew stronger. Berlin still walked with pride, but his health was failing. Sometimes he disappeared into a room alone, coughing, sweating, and hiding his pain. Yet when he returned, he stood tall, his voice cold and firm, as if nothing could touch him. To the others, he was a leader. To himself, he was a man racing against time. Tokyo grew restless. She hated waiting. She wanted action, movement, fire. She wanted to feel alive. But the plan was slow, careful, and full of patience. She often argued with Berlin, her voice sharp, her eyes burning. Rio stood beside her, always ready to follow her, even when he was afraid. His love for her was stronger than his fear of Berlin. Denver spent more time near Monica, the hostage who had captured his heart. He tried to hide it, but everyone could see. His strange laugh, his soft words, his clumsy attempts at comfort, all of it showed his feelings. Monica, too, began to change. At first, she had seen Denver only as a robber, a threat. But slowly, she saw his heart. He was not cruel like Berlin, nor reckless like Tokyo. He was kind, even in the middle of madness. Nairobi kept her focus on the machines. She shouted orders, clapped her hands, and made the hostages work. "Faster, faster! We are making history." She laughed, but behind her smile was worry. She knew the team was breaking apart. She knew emotions were stronger than rules. Outside, the police camp was tense. Raquel Murillo studied every word from the professor, trying to break his walls. But the more she spoke to him, the more she felt something strange. He was clever, calm, and gentle in ways she did not expect. Sometimes she even forgot he was the enemy. Her bosses pressured her for results, but her heart grew weaker each time she heard his voice. The professor was fighting his own battle. Rio's mistake had brought the police close to his hideout. He had barely escaped discovery. He cleaned his tracks, wore disguises, and kept his voice steady on the phone. To his team, he sounded calm, like a man in full control, but inside his heart beat fast. He knew the smallest mistake could end everything. The hostages were not quiet anymore. They whispered, they planned, they waited for chances. Some of them hated the robbers. Some admired them. And some, like Monica, were torn between fear and strange affection. One night, a hostage tried to escape. Shots were fired, screams filled the hall, and panic spread. No one was killed, but the calm was broken. The police outside thought it was their chance to move in, but the professor had prepared for this. His traps and plans stopped them. The robbers held their ground, but the trust inside the mint grew weaker. Tokyo was furious. She shouted at Berlin, saying his rules were killing them. Berlin shouted back, calling her reckless and childish. The others tried to calm them, but the air was full of fire. In those moments, the hostages saw the robbers not as perfect machines, but as human beings full of cracks. Denver and Monica's secret grew stronger. They shared quiet moments, hidden looks, and whispers. It was dangerous, but neither of them could stop. Denver, who had never known real love, felt alive for the first time. Monica, trapped in fear, felt safe in his presence. But if Berlin discovered the truth, everything could explode. Outside, Raquel's life was falling apart. Her bosses doubted her, her family was distant, and the pressure of the heist crushed her. The only place she found comfort was in her strange conversations with the professor. She did not know who he was, but his words made her feel seen, understood. Without realizing it, she was falling under his spell. The professor knew this. He used her feelings as part of the plan, but he also felt something he had not expected. For years, his life had been only about the heist, the plan, the dream. Now, for the first time, he felt warmth toward someone. He told himself it was just strategy, but deep inside, he knew it was more. Back inside the mint, the money piles grew higher. Billions of euros filled the rooms, enough to change all their lives forever. But the more the money grew, the more their problems grew too. Trust was fading. Rules were breaking. Hearts were leading where minds should have ruled. One day, the police prepared a direct attack. They brought in armed forces, ready to storm the building. The robbers heard the sounds of boots and guns outside. Fear spread through the hostages. But the professor had predicted this move. He had planned for it. When the police tried to break in, the robbers fought back. Bullets cracked through the air, glass shattered, and chaos filled the halls. The robbers fired warning shots, pushing the forces back. No hostages were killed, but the mint shook with violence. For the first time, the robbers felt the danger of death close to them. They were not just playing a game anymore. They were standing between life and death every minute, every second. After the attack, silence returned, but it was a different silence. It was heavy, full of fear. Some hostages cried quietly. Some robbers sat with their heads in their hands. Even Berlin, usually calm, looked shaken. Tokyo stared at the red walls, her hands trembling. She realized the truth. They were not untouchable. The police would never stop. The world outside was against them. And inside, love, anger, and secrets were eating them alive. But then she remembered the professor's words. Patience is power. They still had time. They still had the plan. And so, even with fear in their hearts, the robbers went back to work. The machines kept running. The masks stayed on. The dream of escape was still alive, but the cracks were growing wider, and soon something would break. The Royal Mint no longer felt like a building. It felt like a cage, trapping both robbers and hostages together. Days had passed, and the air inside was thick with fear, sweat, and tension. The piles of money grew taller, but so did the weight on everyone's shoulders. Berlin still acted like a commander, his voice strong, his orders sharp. But his sickness grew worse. Sometimes he leaned against the wall when no one was looking. His body was weak, but his pride was stronger than his pain. He refused to let anyone see him as fragile. To the team, he was still the man in control, the one who held everything together. Tokyo burned with frustration. She hated being under Berlin's rules. She hated waiting while the police outside grew stronger. She wanted fire, action, escape. Her eyes often looked at Rio, her young lover, who followed her with blind devotion. Rio wanted peace, but Tokyo wanted chaos, and this difference pulled them apart. Nairobi tried to keep hope alive. She clapped her hands, cheered for the printing machines, and reminded everyone why they were there. "We are making a new life," she said again and again. Her laughter filled the air, but her eyes often betrayed her sadness. She thought of her child, waiting for her outside, and prayed she would survive to see that smile again. Denver's world had changed. Monica, the hostage he had been ordered to watch, had become more than just a hostage. She had become his secret love. They shared quiet talks, secret glances, and moments where the war outside faded away. He told her about his life, his father, his dreams. She listened with a heart that slowly opened. What began as fear grew into trust, and what grew into trust turned into love. Moscow noticed. He loved his son and wanted him to be happy, but he knew this love was dangerous. Falling for a hostage could destroy the plan, destroy everything. He warned Denver, but Denver could not stop. For the first time in his life, he had found someone who truly saw him. Outside the Mint, the police never rested. Raquel Murillo sat with tired eyes listening to the professor's calm voice. Every word he spoke was like a thread weaving around her heart. She wanted to see him as the enemy, but she could not. He was too clever, too kind, too human. Without knowing it, she was falling into his world. The professor felt it too. At first, he had used Raquel as part of the plan, manipulating her, studying her. But now, something inside him was changing. For years, his life had been cold and lonely, filled only with books and plans. Now he felt warmth when he spoke to her. It was dangerous, but it was real. The police grew desperate. Their attacks had failed, their tricks had been exposed, and their negotiator was slipping into the hands of the enemy. So, they planned something bolder. They sent a group of officers inside, disguised and armed, hoping to free the hostages and take down the robbers from within. The robbers were not blind. Berlin's eyes caught the signs, and soon the whole team knew. When the officers revealed themselves, chaos exploded. Shots rang out, screams filled the hall, and the building shook with violence. The robbers fought fiercely. Denver and Moscow worked side by side, their bond stronger than ever. Tokyo moved like fire, fearless and sharp. Nairobi shouted orders, keeping the hostages under control. Helsinki's strength became a wall no one could break, but the fight came at a cost. Oslo, one of the strong cousins, was struck badly. He fell, his body broken, his strength fading. Helsinki stayed by his side, his heart breaking, but there was nothing he could do. Oslo was gone, and the team was now smaller, weaker. The loss hit them hard. For the first time, the masks could not hide their pain. They cried in silence, even Berlin, who usually hid behind his pride. The dream of a perfect heist felt further away. The hostages, too, were shaken. Some of them saw the robbers not as monsters, but as people who felt pain, who loved, who lost. The lines between good and evil grew even more blurred. Raquel watched from outside, her heart torn. She was supposed to break the robbers, but each move failed. She was supposed to hate the professor, but her feelings grew deeper. She began to doubt not only the police, but herself. Inside, Denver's love for Monica grew stronger. She was no longer a hostage in his eyes. She was part of his heart. She, too, chose to stand by him, even if it meant betraying her old life. She whispered to him that she wanted to escape with him when it was all over. But Berlin found out. His cold eyes saw the truth, and his words cut like knives. He warned Denver that love was poison in a place like this. But deep inside, Berlin envied him. Berlin, who had loved and lost, saw in Denver what he himself could never have again. The professor faced his own danger. The police grew suspicious of him. They began searching for a man who seemed too calm, too clever, too close to Raquel. He had to disguise himself, hide his tracks, and play tricks to stay free. One mistake, and the entire plan would collapse. As the days dragged on, the pressure inside the Mint grew unbearable. The robbers were exhausted, the hostages restless, the money almost ready. Billions of euros filled the rooms, more than enough to change their lives forever. But at the same time, their unity was breaking apart. Tokyo and Berlin clashed again and again, their anger almost turning into violence. Rio, torn between love and fear, stood helpless. Nairobi tried to keep the fire of hope alive, but even her laughter grew weak. Denver and Monica's secret love became harder to hide. Moscow's heart was heavy, watching his son walk into danger, and outside, the world was watching. People on the streets sang for the robbers, wore masks, and raised their fists. To them, the heist was no longer just a crime. It was a symbol of rebellion, a fight against power. But symbols could not stop bullets. And everyone inside the Mint knew that the end was coming. The question was no longer if they would escape, but how much they would lose along the way. The professor had promised a perfect plan. But perfection was breaking, piece by piece, under the weight of love, fear, and death. And yet, they kept moving forward. Because once you start a game like this, there is no turning back. The Royal Mint was now a battlefield of silence, secrets, and fear. The robbers were tired, the hostages were restless, and the police outside were preparing for the final strike. The stacks of money inside had reached their peak. Billions of euros lay waiting, ready to be carried out if the plan worked. But the air was heavy with the sense that not everyone would leave alive. Berlin's body grew weaker each day, but his willpower never broke. He walked with pride, his voice calm and sharp, reminding everyone that they were soldiers in a war. He knew the end was near, but he wanted to face it with dignity. To him, death was not a defeat. It was a stage where he could perform one last time. Tokyo's anger had not cooled. She hated being trapped by rules, hated being treated as weak. Her love for Rio gave her strength, but it also gave her pain. Rio, in his innocence, dreamed of freedom with her, somewhere far away where no one could touch them. But both of them knew the dream might never come true. Nairobi's hope flickered like a candle. She worked harder than anyone, shouting at the machines, clapping her hands, and pushing the hostages forward. She dreamed of walking out with the money and building a life with her child. She told herself again and again that she would survive. But in her heart, she knew fate was cruel. Denver and Monica's love was no longer a secret. The others saw it, and some accepted it, while others despised it. Denver held her hand when no one was looking, and she whispered promises of escape. For them, the heist was not just about money anymore. It was about finding each other in the middle of chaos. Moscow watched his son with heavy eyes. He loved seeing Denver happy, but he feared for his life. He prayed quietly, hoping the plan would end before love destroyed them both. He remembered the professor's words about rules, about no emotions, and he knew those rules were broken beyond repair. Helsinki stood quietly, his heart still broken after losing Oslo. His eyes were filled with sadness, but his body remained strong. He had no dreams left for himself, only loyalty to the team. Outside, Raquel Murillo's world had collapsed. Her bosses no longer trusted her. Her family was distant, but her heart was now tied to the professor. She had discovered part of his secret, but instead of turning him in, she protected him. She was supposed to be the police officer chasing the criminal, but instead she found herself falling in love with him. The professor felt the same. For years he had lived with only books, silence, and plans. Now he had found someone who made him feel human again. It was dangerous, but he could not stop it. He told himself that the plan came first. But in the quiet of his heart, Raquel had become part of his dream. The police prepared for a final assault. They had failed too many times, lost too much respect. They wanted to end it no matter the cost. Tanks, guns, and soldiers waited outside the Mint. The robbers knew it was coming. The professor knew it too. The perfect plan was reaching its most dangerous stage. Inside, the tension exploded. Tokyo was caught trying to break the rules again, and Berlin decided she was too dangerous. In a brutal moment, he forced her out of the mint, handing her to the police. Rio screamed, begging for her, but it was too late. Tokyo was captured, dragged into custody, her eyes burning with rage. Rio's heart shattered. He felt betrayed, angry, and broken. Without Tokyo, he lost his spirit. The others tried to keep him focused, but his pain was too heavy. The professor, too, felt the pressure. He had to find a way to save her without breaking the plan. But Tokyo was no ordinary prisoner. She was fire untamed and fearless. She found a way to escape the police transport, and with help from the professor's tricks, she returned to the mint. Her arrival was like thunder. The team, once divided, felt her fire again, but the final hours were cruel. During a fight with the police, Moscow was struck. Denver held his father in his arms, tears streaming down his face. Moscow smiled weakly, telling his son he was proud of him, that he was stronger than he ever was. With his last breath, he gave his blessing for Denver to live his own life, even if it meant loving a hostage. Then he was gone, leaving Denver broken but determined. The team mourned, but there was no time for grief. The police were preparing their biggest assault yet. The professor's voice came through the radios, steady but heavy with emotion. He reminded them of the plan, of the tunnels they had dug, of the escape route waiting beneath the mint. Berlin knew his time had come. His sickness was worse, and the police were closing in. He looked at his team, Tokyo, Rio, Nairobi, Denver, Helsinki, and Monica, and he knew someone had to buy them time. With a smile that hid his pain, he took command one last time. He stood tall in the hall, dressed in his red jumpsuit and mask, waiting for the storm. The police charged in, bullets flying, shouting, breaking through walls. Berlin fired back with fury, holding them off, giving his team the minutes they needed to escape. His body shook with pain, but his pride kept him strong. As the others ran through the tunnels with bags of money, Berlin fought like a man who had nothing left to lose. He smiled as the bullets closed in, as if he had chosen this ending. His sacrifice became the shield that saved the others. The team burst out on the other side into freedom. The professor, waiting in the shadows, guided them. They carried the money, their hearts heavy with loss but alive with hope. The police stormed the mint, but it was too late. The robbers were gone. The money was gone. The people outside cheered, wearing masks, waving flags, singing songs of rebellion. Raquel stood apart, torn between duty and love. She knew the professor was out there, free and alive, and though the world saw him as a criminal, to her, he was something more. The heist was over, but the story was not. Some had died, some had found love, and some had become symbols for the people. The professor had proven that brains could beat power, that ideas were stronger than bullets. And though the royal mint stood silent once more, the echo of the red suits and the masks would never fade. The world would never forget the heist. The heist ended, but it was not forgotten. Some of the robbers lost their lives, some found love, and some escaped with freedom. The professor proved that brains could defeat power, and the red suits became a symbol for the people. It was more than money. It was a story of hope, love, and rebellion that the world would remember forever. Subscribe to Crime Loom, and join us as we unravel more heists, mysteries, and untold legends.